There are some places that should never be visited, even if they are just marked on a map. They made that mistake, and now there was no turning back. 5 friends, Ethan, Lisa, Mark, Sophie, and Daniel, decided to go on a camping trip in search of adventure. But this was no ordinary camp. There were terrifying rumors about the area. According to old records, people who camped here disappeared without a trace. But they didn't believe in such stories. To them, it was all just myths. As they lit the campfire and joked around, a sharp whisper echoed from the depths of the forest. At first, they thought it was the wind. But suddenly, the whisper turned into a scream. Mark jumped to his feet. That came from very close. Mark and his friends were both shocked and scared, but instead of leaving, they pointed their flashlight toward the source of the scream. Among the trees, they saw a figure draped in a pale dress, clinging to its body as if soaked. Its face was hidden, standing completely still. Daniel blinked, and in that instant, the woman was closer. Lisa let out a scream and turned around, only to realize their campsite was no longer the same. The tents were torn apart. Their belongings were scattered. Strange symbols were carved into the ground. The night had suddenly grown darker. Lisa and her friends were in shock, unsure of what to do. They thought it was just a prank. "Someone's messing with us," Ethan muttered, his voice trembling. But no answer came. Just then, Sophie's eyes locked onto the lake. "That thing, it's in the water." A pair of eyes surfaced in the middle of the lake. They looked lifeless, yet they stared directly at them. Then, long, skeletal arms emerged from the water. Suddenly, Sophie let out a piercing scream and collapsed to the ground. Her body twisted involuntarily. Something was pulling her, but there was nothing there. Ethan and Mark tried to grab her, but her skin was turning colder and colder. Then, Sophie's eyes snapped open, pitch black. "You can't escape," she whispered. What do you think happened to Sophie? Panic took over, and they all ran in different directions. But no matter which way they went, they always ended up back at the campsite. The forest had become an endless loop. Suddenly, Lisa's scream echoed. When they turned, she was gone. Only wet footprints remained by the fire. It seems Lisa is no longer with us. Mark desperately pulled out a large knife from his bag. We have to leave. Now. Just then, the fire went out completely. A whisper rose from the darkness. Who's next? One by one, they disappeared. And the horror they thought wasn't real had become their reality. By morning, the campsite was abandoned. The tents were still there, but empty. Phones, supplies, and food remained untouched. But there was no sign of them. The only thing left was a message carved into the wood near the lake. Will they forget us too? A group of brave friends decide to go there to unravel its mystery. They want to discover what happened to those who disappeared. But the real question is, no one has ever returned safely from here, so what will happen to them? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. A group of friends prepares for a vacation at an old campsite. However, this campsite was abandoned years ago and has become the center of mysterious disappearances. While everything seems normal at first, terrifying secrets will gradually surface, and the spirits of those who disappeared in the past will begin to appear as if they are still trapped in these lands. The group members will try to both find their missing friend and solve the curse. When they arrive at the campsite and set up their tents, the sky begins to darken. They light a fire and gather around it, making plans to spend the night. However, as the night progresses, they begin to hear strange noises. At first, they think it's just the wind or sounds made by animals. But then, they notice a figure hiding around the tents. Alex, gathering his courage, steps outside and takes a few steps into the darkness. At that moment, he hears a scream. When Alex comes back inside, his eyes wide, staring at something. Sophie asks him what happened, and he simply says, "We need to leave, this place isn't safe." However, they find no trace outside. They are forced to spend the night there. Maybe for them, there would never be another night. On the second day, the group plans to go for a hike. However, suddenly, Ethan goes missing. While searching the surroundings, they hear Ethan's screams but can't seem to find their missing friend. At the spot where Ethan was last seen, they notice something unusual. Sophie finds an old photograph lying on the ground. The photo shows a group of former campers with their campsite in the background. Now, I have a question for you. How do you think this photo ended up here? After this, they take another look at the photograph. As the group examines the photo, they notice an inscription carved into a stone behind them. Camp 13, the place of the forever lost. This inscription gives them a chilling clue that the place is truly abandoned, and the campers here had vanished without a trace. After several hours of searching, they discover an old settlement near where Ethan disappeared. There, they find abandoned buildings and ancient graveyards. But the strangest thing is that the dates on the gravestones go back much further than they could have imagined. As the group moves deeper into the forest, they strangely feel as if time has stopped. They realize they are trapped in an environment where a day never ends, and the sun never sets. Their sense of time is gone. At night, they feel someone or something approaching them from the forest. One night, when Emma is left alone, she sees several old tents in front of her own. These tents belong to the campers who had gone missing long ago. They then find an old journal. The journal reveals a terrifying secret about Camp 13's past. Years ago, those who camped here vanished and were slowly trapped within the forest. But there is something else. As they venture deeper into the woods, the spirits of the missing people are reborn, but they are not alive. They are merely the souls of the dead that continue to exist in this world. A force inside the forest tries to capture them, pulling each of them to different places. Sophie suddenly disappears, and Lucas encounters the ghost of one of the lost campers at an old campsite. The rest of the group decides to venture deeper into the forest to find Sophie. As a result, each of them struggles in a different way with what is happening. The group bravely decides to venture deeper into the forest to find Sophie. However, as they move further into the woods, they realize that time and space are bending. One moment, 2 days have passed, then suddenly, they find Sophie. But Sophie is not the same. Her eyes are hollow, and she has forgotten everything, remaining only as one of the lost souls. At that moment, they realize that in order for Sophie to be saved, the curse must be broken. One person can sacrifice themselves to end this curse. Alex sacrifices himself to save Sophie and heads deeper into the forest. His friends later find only a grave, the last victim of Camp 13. Alex was gone, but the mystery of the forest was finally solved. Daniel, Olivia, and Carter went camping for the weekend on a remote mountainside. It was a place almost no one visited, where nature reigned completely. When they arrived at the campsite, they realized that there was no one else around. The silence didn't bring peace, it carried an eerie emptiness. As they set up their tents, Daniel noticed an old, tattered red tent among the trees. Its surface was covered in moss, as if it had been abandoned for years. But when they looked inside, they found nothing. No sleeping bag, no backpack, not even a trace of someone ever being there. That night, as Olivia sat by the fire, she thought she saw the zipper of the red tent slowly opening. But when she rubbed her eyes and looked again, everything seemed normal. Maybe it's just the wind, she thought. However, around midnight, Carter heard footsteps outside their tents. They were light, but unmistakably there. He grabbed his flashlight and looked outside, only to see that the red tent zipper was slightly open. But they had closed it earlier in the day. Just then, Olivia's scream echoed through the night. Daniel and Carter rushed to her tent, but Olivia was gone. The inside of her tent was empty. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no indication that she had ever been there. In their panic, Carter's eyes landed on the red tent. Its zipper was now fully open. Inside, a dark silhouette shifted. As Daniel and Carter slowly backed away, whispers started emerging from the tent. Indistinct words, eerie sounds filled the air. Just as they were about to run, a tall, pale-faced figure peeked out from the red tent. But it wasn't Olivia. Who, or what, was in there? The man's eyes were hollow, his face dry and lifeless. He tilted his head and smiled, and in an instant, he was pulled back inside the red tent. The zipper closed by itself, sealing the eerie figure within. Before Daniel and Carter could react, the red tent slowly began to fade away, as if it had never been there in the first place. The next day, a rescue team arrived to search for them. But at the campsite, they found only 2 tents. 3 people had gone on this camping trip. Only 2 would return. And the strangest part? There was no trace of Olivia, not even her belongings.